even if he was sidelined and killed eventually. And this is what Bob Marley...
For our listeners, who is Marcus Garvey?
Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican philosopher who was very convinced about the need for the African man to come back home. And he believed that at one time there will be a leader who will rise up out of Africa and will inspire all Africans in the diaspora to come back. And because of the Ethiopian connection to Israel, they were looking for a Messiah. And so in the 1930s, when Emperor Haile Selassie became the Emperor of Ethiopia, it was like a sign for those people. And then the people in the diaspora who believed that Africa was home, they were longing to come back home. Then they took on a certain identity called Rastafarianism, which seems to worship Emperor Haile Selassie as the reincarnation of Jesus Christ who would come back. Because, again, like we said, Ethiopia had not been colonized. So Marcus Garvey is one of the most and foremost African thinkers. But again, African thinkers are not very welcome. That's why Rastafarianism has struggled to have a mainstay. But it was now when Emperor Haile Selassie went to Jamaica in the late 1960s, I think 69 or 66, that now this movement of people who wanted to come back to Africa took hold. And now that is a movement that found Bob Marley active in his music. And then in 1980 he came and did the show Africa Unite in Zimbabwe, where he sang a song about Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe is one of the most beautiful places according to Bob Marley. But look at it today. So this is really the line of thought of people who have been talking about the African man's identity before we came up with this podcast.
But you've heard as when something goes wrong, you hear someone say Africans. There's that thought that we can't handle.
That's ignorance.
We can't invent. We can't do stuff.
That's ignorance.
Yeah.
Baganda were having C-section births before Mengo Hospital was built. Africans built the pyramids. And they are by an African, but because African had no pen or alphabet to write that. Today I took a pale looking man and I showed him a river he was looking for. No one has that Musoga man's journal. but someone should look for that Musoga man's journal and say, hey, the man who took speak to see the Nile was called Isabile. Because now with education and we live in a generation which has now...
But is that being even taught?
It is still being taught. This is the idiocy I'm talking about. That now we are in a generation where...
We don't talk of Isabile, we talk about speak.
We talk about speak. No one cares about Isabile, who took him and said, Chira no, Atan Kirano. It starts from there, it goes like this, like that, no one. And then, Lake Victoria. Why is it Victoria? You get? So, these are the African problems. That Africa does not belong to itself.
All right.
So an African man, if I talk about it, has to own himself. So I'm saying all this to say that we moved from colonialism, from slavery to colonialism, to an education system that subjugates the African man and elevates the
white one.
The white one. So it leaves the African man confused about who he is.
500 years later.
500 years later, he still thinks that America is the promised land. Yet in America, George Floyd is being killed for being there.
Yeah.
They should have never taken him there in the first place.
Yeah.
And then they should leave Africa alone.
So to clarify,
this is not a political show. It's just that when we talk about manhood, it's a global issue.
It is.
Because the family is the smallest state of the nation. So what goes on in a family affects the nation. So what I'm showing you is that when a man's identity and character has been dogged and played as it has been for the African man, it becomes a global issue.
Right.
That is why you see people drowning in the high seas. You see people killing each other because the African man has been told that you are worthless.
Right. So now, the solution here. What should an African father be teaching his son and even his daughter in this day and in this age, given what we've just been discussing?
First and foremost, every African father should teach their children that God is everywhere. That's number one.
Not that God is not there.
That God is everywhere.
Yeah.
Then number two, once you've understood that God is everywhere, then you will know that you don't have to go looking for God in a certain place, or that no one should bring God for you where you are. Why are we starting with God? Because we don't own ourselves. So if we acknowledge that there is a common denominator that makes us equal and balances the equation,
yeah, all of us before God are one.
So there will not be a business of Christianity, Islam. Those are now choices of how you worship. But if God is one, He's everywhere. That is lesson number one. Then lesson number two is thou shalt know thyself. After thou hast known God, thou shalt know thyself. To know yourself is to look at yourself properly and accept and acknowledge who you are, your limitations, your capacities, and your potential.
Your strengths.
You get? Yeah. Know yourself.
Yeah.
Don't allow someone to define you. Define yourself.
It shouldn't be an outside-in job.
No.
It should be an inside-out.
And this is what I feel bad when people get educated only to come out ignorant.
Yeah.
Because education is supposed to draw out. Education opens the windows of your eyes and of your ears.
If you want to
so that you can come out, something can come out of you. Educare means to draw out.
It's to draw out, actually.
Yes.
That's what education is all about. It's supposed to be drawing. But let me tell you, if you wanted to see stupidity that is coming out of education, look at how a PhD holder, a degree holder, a certificate holder from the so-called education, look at how he's speaking when we are doing voting.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen whether it's a NUP, I don't know, PNU or a Ford or a NRM? Have you ever seen those guys talking?
Yeah.
It's like there is nothing between their ears. And yet, you would expect that these are the educated ones.
Education and foolishness they are not always mutually exclusive. You can be an educated fool.
Yeah, there's a song about that, right?
And how many we have of those in Africa?
Yeah.
So that is what I'm saying. We need to teach our children to know themselves. How do you know yourself?
And become true to themselves.
Yes. Now, when you understand yourself as a man, you understand your responsibility.
Yeah.
And your surroundings.
Yeah.
So SST and geography teach us that these are the studies of man and his surroundings.
Yeah.
So how do you study geography and SST and you come out and you're cutting down trees, you are throwing plastic around?
Yeah.
This is ignorance.
Yeah.
So, if you know yourself, you will know your responsibility. And your responsibility is to your community, to your family, to the nations to come. And you know what is really, really, really sad? Is that as Africans, we've been told that we have a low life expectancy. And you know what that has done? When you're told that Africans live 50, 40 years, it kills imagination because no one thinks that they're going to be around till they're 70.
People don't think past lunch.
And that is Africa's problem.
Yeah.
We don't think.
So if you don't have this identity of who you really are, you don't have this awareness, vision becomes blurred, or vision just
you can't build anything. You're only stealing. And that is
or you're waiting for someone else to build for you, and then you worship them.
Yes.
So to speak. So the idea of selling off your birthright continues because you don't know who you are.
You don't know who you are.
Right? Or even if the birthright is there, you cheapen it. The value of your birthright is to you nothing because you have no idea who you really are.
So we should learn from the Bagisu who take their children through pain and sit them down and say, now you are a man.
Yeah.
This is what being a man is. And I'll tell you a little story about the Borana. I watched a documentary recently on YouTube about the people of the Borana. This is now one of the many tribes in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And they're talking about the transition from boyhood to manhood. So these are cattle keepers. It's pretty much a desert. So in this particular story, this man says to his wife, tomorrow but one, I will need to borrow our sons. There is an elder son now. He was saying, I want to go with the youngest. I want to take him. We are going to buy salt and take it to the market. And my brother, where they were going to buy the salt was a 1 week journey. Yeah. Like 3 days to get to the mine, and then 2 days to get to the, like 1 day to get to the market, and then 3 days to get back home.
Yeah.
So the wife was like, you know what? Who will help me? I was like, no, let the boy decide.
Yeah.
And the boy is like, I want to go because I will learn so much. So on this journey, they walk and walk and walk. Then the boy is the one who is carrying a small goat, and then the father and the brother are leading with a camel. So they walk through those deserts and they eventually get to the mine. It's hard work, but they buy the salt, then they go to the market. And the father just sits back and watches the sons
sell and so on.
Now, on the way back, they had to cross like a wasteland.
Yeah.
Now, the narrator says about this place that it is surrounded by warring tribes.
Right.
Like sworn enemies and stuff.
Yeah.
And so the father tells him that to that side, these are those people. We have a feud with them. To that side, these are those people. We work with them. To that side, these are those people. We marry there. So this is where your family is juxtaposed. And then eventually they walk back home. And when they walk back home, the boy has made profit. He has learned trade. He has learned hard work. He has learned his people.
Street smartness.
He has learned diplomacy, because in the market was one place of peace where all the tribes could come in peace and trade.
Yeah.
So this journey, every father has it with his son once to induct them in the ways of a man, because they're doing all this to provide for the family by walking 500 kilometers to and fro and learning what to eat, what not to eat, which people to relate with and which people not to relate with.
Wow.
Now, remember what I told you about the trip I had this past weekend?
Yeah.
I had last had that trip in 1993. 1993, I was 7. And my dad told us 6 a.m. we're waking up. So we woke up. I was 7 years, imagine. And then we began to walk, me, my dad, and my mother. And we walked. Then came, said, this is where your grandfather was buried. We greeted those people. Then we continued through mountains, up, down. All I remember is there were so many hills we went up. We started walking at 6 in the morning. We arrived where we're going at 1 p.m.
Whoa.
What I remember about that journey is that at one point, my dad was like 150 meters away from me.
Yeah.
And then my
Far
mom,
ahead.
was like 100 meters away from me. Then me.
Yeah.
Like, we walked for a very long distance until it was disintegrated. But you know what that journey did for me? I walked from where my grandfather, I told you, had migrated to.
Yeah.
And I walked back to where my grandfather originally came from, at the foot of the mountain.
Yeah.
And I met my great-grandparents at that time.
Yeah.
So when I watched this documentary, it related.
Right.
You know what this is about? It's about walking in the footsteps of your father.
Yeah.
It's about, so this is how identity is passed down. Fathers, first of all, like you said, being sons of their fathers.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate that we're living in a fatherless world, and it has been consistently happening for Africa for 500 years. This is what I say, that 500 years ago our fathers were taken away, and we wonder why up to today the black people in the West do not feel like they belong there. Yeah. It's a systemic endemic identity issue. So we have to go back and say, how did our fathers walk before English was introduced? How did our fathers believe and worship?
How did they trade?
How did they trade?
How did they work?
You get? Yeah. Now, these are the things that, to come back to the question that you asked, what should African fathers now be teaching their children? We've talked about identity. We've talked about imagination. So you know how passionate I am about imagination. You know, so imagination is where work comes out of. That when you have imagined how a cloth should look, a Maasai will give you something. He'll give you shoes. And then imagination comes out